Council Station Meridian grew larger in the view screen with each passing minute. The massive structure was home to 200,000 beings from across the galaxy. Today, every single one of them was watching the approaching destroyer. News drones filled space around the station. Medical ships waited in perfect formation. The Revenant looked like it had fought a war. Hull plating was scorched black. The port side was melted slag where the railgun had destroyed itself. Sparks still cascaded from damaged systems, but the ship was moving under its own power, and that was what mattered. Docking clearance granted, Borum announced. They're giving us priority. Every medical team on the station is standing by. Deho nodded but said nothing. He was too tired for words. They all were. The bridge crew sat at their stations like ghosts, barely able to function. But function they did, because 40,000 lives depended on them for just a few more minutes. The docking was gentle. Minji's hands shook as she made the final adjustments, but her skill held. The Revenant connected to the station with barely a bump. Docking clamps locked into place. Finally, after 6 days of impossible struggle, they were home. "We're secured," Minji whispered. The airlock doors opened. Medical teams in protective suits rushed in, carrying equipment and supplies. They moved through the Revenant with practiced efficiency, assessing patients and prioritizing treatment. The survivors began to disembark. 40,000 beings, exhausted and frightened but alive, walked through the airlock onto the safety of the station. Families held each other. Children cried, but from relief now instead of fear. Medical staff guided them to treatment centers and temporary housing. The young Kalarian child who Jiwan had saved was carried out by his mother. As they passed through the airlock, the mother stopped and turned back. She saw Jiwan standing in the corridor, barely able to hold himself upright. She bowed deeply, tears streaming down her furry face. Jiwan bowed back, then had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. After all the survivors had disembarked, the Revenant's crew finally emerged. 140 humans stepped out onto the station. They looked like death itself. Thin from malnutrition, shaking from exhaustion. Some had to be helped by medics. Yijin was still on a stretcher, but all of them were alive. Something extraordinary happened then. The survivors, thousands of them, formed 2 lines creating a corridor. As the human crew walked through, they bowed. They reached out with tentacles, hands, claws, and appendages of every type. They touched the humans gently, reverently. Many wept openly. Captain Velthari stepped forward, his body still weak but his voice strong. "Commander Deho, on behalf of every soul you saved, I offer thanks that can never be adequate. You and your crew gave everything to save us. We owe you a debt beyond measuring." Deho managed a tired smile. "Just buy us dinner sometime, Captain. We're starving." The crowd laughed, the sound warm and full of life. Station security had to guide the human crew away as more survivors tried to thank them. Medical teams took the crew to emergency treatment. They needed food, rest, warmth, and healing. But 3 days later, once the immediate crisis had passed, Deho received a different summons. He was ordered to appear before the Galactic Council Security Committee. The message was formal and cold. He was being called to answer for his actions. The council chamber was intimidating. It was a vast amphitheater where representatives from 200 species sat in judgment. Deho entered alone, wearing his dress uniform. His body was still recovering, but his bearing was military perfect. Admiral Kretar, the reptilian military commander, presided over the session. His eyes were unreadable as he looked down at the human standing before the entire council. "Commander Daiho of the Terran Space Service," Kretar's voice echoed through the chamber. "You stand before this council to answer charges regarding your actions in the Void Marches. You engaged 17 hostile vessels without authorization. You destroyed 16 ships without offering terms of surrender. You violated council engagement protocols, weapons treaties, and rescue operation guidelines. How do you answer these charges?" Deho didn't hesitate. "Guilty on all counts, Admiral." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Species began arguing among themselves. Some demanded punishment. Others called for clemency. "You admit to violating council law?" Kretar asked. "I admit to saving 40,000 lives," Deho responded clearly. "If your laws say that's wrong, then your laws need to change." The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages. Some supported Deho, others condemned him. The noise was deafening. Kretar called for silence. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet. "Commander, you don't understand what you've done. If we allow individual vessels to take military action outside Council authority, it creates chaos. We have laws for a reason. Yes, you have laws, Deho said. And those laws meant that 16 ships fled from a distress call. Those laws meant that raiders operate freely in regions you've decided aren't worth protecting. Those laws meant that 40,000 innocent people were going to die while committees debated the proper response. So I broke your laws, and I would do it again. Before Kretar could respond, the chamber doors opened. Filthari entered, followed by hundreds of survivors. They filled the galleries, a sea of different species united by a common experience. Counselors, Filthari announced. As victims of the crime being discussed, we invoke our right of testimony. We will speak, the council had to allow it. For the next 3 hours, survivors testified. They described the terror of the raider attack, the desperation of the distress call that everyone ignored, the children dying in the dark, and they described the humans who came anyway. Dr. Shia, the insectoid physician, addressed the council directly. I am a doctor with 40 years of experience. I have worked with the finest medical technology in the galaxy, but I watched the human Dr. G1 save lives with primitive equipment and desperate improvisation. He saved my daughter's life when I could not. Tell me, counselors, which of your laws is more important than that? Pilix's mother spoke next, her voice shaking with emotion. My son asked me if humans were scary. Everyone says humans are dangerous, violent, unpredictable, but I learned the truth. Humans are terrifying to those who hurt the innocent. To those who need help, humans are hope itself. Counselor Breshtik, an avian pacifist, spoke after the testimonies ended. Commander Deho, help us understand. Your species has been in space for only 73 years, yet you operate by principles that seem foreign to us. What drives humans to these extremes? Deho thought carefully before answering. Counselor, my planet was violent before we reached space. We fought wars constantly. We nearly destroyed ourselves. But we learned one critical lesson through all that pain. When everything goes wrong, when death is certain, when all hope is gone, the only thing that matters is that someone shows up, someone who refuses to abandon you. He looked around the chamber. You call it extreme. We call it necessary. We remember what it was like to be alone in the dark. We remember waiting for help that never came. We swore we would never let that happen to someone else if we had the power to prevent it. Even if it costs your lives? Kretar asked quietly. Especially then, Deho replied. Because survival without compassion isn't worth anything. What good is living if we lose the part of ourselves that makes us worth saving? The council deliberated for 2 days. The galaxy watched and waited. The debate threatened to split the council itself. Finally, Admiral Kretar reconvened the chamber. Commander Deho, Kretar announced, this council has reached a decision. You violated multiple articles of council law. However, you also saved 40,000 lives that we had effectively abandoned. You demonstrated principles many of us have forgotten. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. Therefore, all charges are dismissed. Furthermore, you are awarded the Star of Valor, the highest honor we can give. Wear it knowing it comes with our gratitude and our shame that such valor was necessary. Counselor Breshtik stood. This council also passes Resolution 7742, the Human Exception Clause. When humanitarian crisis occurs and council response is impossible or delayed, human vessels are authorized to respond with full discretion. We trust them to do what we cannot. The resolution passed by narrow vote. Humanity, the youngest species in the council, had just been given extraordinary authority. Not because they sought it, but because they earned it. 6 months later, everything had changed. Human destroyer crews received new orders. Rescue operations became primary missions. Other species noticed. The Silicants launched their first rescue fleet. The Avians updated their military doctrine. Even the raiders changed. The Carthax Syndicate fell apart, hunted across 20 sectors. Being a slaver wasn't profitable anymore. On Council Station Meridian, a monument was erected. It showed a human hand reaching down to lift various species upward. The plaque read, "To the crew of the Revenant and all who answer the call. You taught us that civilization is measured by how we protect the weak. When darkness falls, you showed us that someone will come." 1 year after the Void Marches incident, the Revenant received new orders. A mining colony was under attack. 47 families were trapped. The docking process took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of careful maneuvering while both ships drifted through space. The Eternal Harmony was barely holding together. Every sensor showed critical failures across multiple systems. The ship could break apart at any moment. Minji worked with steady hands, ignoring the sweat running down her face. She aligned the docking collars with precision measured in centimeters. One mistake and both ships could be damaged beyond repair. "Contact in 3 seconds," she announced. 2, 1, contact. The ships connected with a deep metallic boom that echoed through both hulls. Alarms screamed as the docking clamps locked into place. For a terrible moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the Eternal Harmony's weakened hull would hold. It held. "We're locked," Minji confirmed. "But Captain, the structural integrity readings are bad. We have maybe 4 hours before the Harmony tears itself apart." "Then we work fast," Deho said. He activated the ship-wide intercom. "All crew, this is the commander. Emergency rescue operations begin now. Get those people to safety." When the airlock doors opened, the Revenant's crew faced a wall of desperate humanity. 40,000 beings pressed forward, all trying to escape at once. The crowd was a mix of every species in the galaxy. Some were tall, some were short. Some had fur, some had scales, some had skin like crystal. All of them were terrified. "Please help us," someone screamed. "My child is trapped in Cargo Bay 7. We have wounded, so many wounded." The noise was overwhelming. Dozens of languages created a wall of sound that made thinking almost impossible. The smell of fear and unwashed bodies hit like a physical force. This was chaos in its purest form. Borum stood at the airlock, her young face showing determination beyond her years. She raised her hands, trying to get attention. No one listened. The crowd kept pushing forward. Then Daiho was beside her. He didn't shout. He simply stood there with absolute authority radiating from every part of his body. Somehow, impossibly, the crowd quieted. "Everyone, listen carefully," Deho said in a voice that carried despite not being loud. "We will get all of you to safety. But you need to follow instructions. Families with children, come forward first. Wounded next. Everyone else after. Stay calm, stay organized. We have time." It was a lie. They didn't have time. But people needed to believe they did, or the panic would kill more people than the failing ship. The evacuation began. Families with children moved through first, guided by crew members to temporary holding areas. Heejin had converted cargo bays into living spaces, installing emergency life support systems. They were cramped and uncomfortable, but they had air and heat. Jiwon's medical bay became a nightmare. Wounded poured in faster than he could treat them. Species he had never seen before arrived with injuries he didn't know how to treat. A mother brought him her child, a small creature with blue fur and forearms. The child was dying, but Jiwon didn't know why. "Help him, please," the mother begged in broken standard language. "He cannot breathe." Jiwon stared at the child, his mind racing. He didn't know this species' anatomy. He didn't know what they breathed, how their lungs worked, or what medication would help versus kill. Every second of hesitation brought the child closer to death. Then Captain Velthari stumbled into the medical bay, followed by several alien doctors. They looked as exhausted as Jiwon felt, but they were here. "You need help," Velthari stated simply. "Desperately," Jiwon admitted. A doctor with insect-like features approached. "I am Dr. Shia. That child is Calarian. Their lungs are failing because the air pressure is too high. They need a hyperbaric chamber. But I assume you don't have equipment for a species you've never encountered." "I don't," Jiwon said. Shia studied the human medical equipment with obvious confusion. The tools looked primitive compared to advanced alien technology. Chemical medications instead of genetic reprogramming. Physical surgery instead of molecular reconstruction, but Shia had no time for judgments. "Can you create a sealed environment with lower air pressure?" Shia asked. "I can try." Jiwon looked around his medical bay, his engineer's mind working. He grabbed an emergency suit, cut away the arms and legs, and created a sealed bubble. He pumped out half the air, lowering the pressure. Then he placed the Calarian child inside. The child gasped, then began breathing normally. The mother collapsed in relief. Shia looked at Jiwon with new respect. "That was clever improvisation, Doctor." "That was desperation," Jiwon corrected. "But I'll take clever if you're offering it. Now can you teach me about the other species while we work? Because I have about 300 patients waiting, and no idea how to treat most of them." What followed was the strangest medical collaboration in galactic history. Human doctors and alien doctors worked side by side, sharing knowledge in real time. Jiwon learned about species with 3 hearts. Shia learned about human surgical techniques. Together they performed miracles with equipment that shouldn't have worked. In the cargo bays, Heejin faced her own crisis. Life support was failing. The Revenant was designed for 140 humans breathing oxygen at specific temperatures. Now it was supporting 40,000 beings of wildly different species. The reptilian species needed heat, or they would enter hibernation. The ice world species needed cold, or they would die. The methane breathers needed completely different atmosphere. The list went on and on. "This is impossible," Heejin muttered, staring at power distribution charts that made no sense. Every system was redlined. She was pulling power from weapons, from engines, from everything non-essential. It still wasn't enough. Taman appeared at her side. "What do you need?" 15 more engineers and a miracle. "I can't give you 15 engineers, but I have hands that can follow instructions. Put me to work." Heejin looked at the weapons officer in surprise. Then she handed him a toolkit. "Cargo Bay 3 needs heat lamps. Take power from the crew quarters. Won't that freeze our quarters? Yes, we'll wear more clothes. Those reptilians will die without heat. Go." Taman went. An hour later, Minji joined them. Then Borum. Soon every crew member who wasn't actively piloting or performing medical work was helping with engineering. They became one large, desperate team working against impossible odds. The crew quarters dropped to near freezing. The humans wore multiple layers of clothing and kept working. The mess hall was converted into a nursery for alien children. The recreation area became a triage center. Every single space on the Revenant was filled with survivors. On hour 70 of the rescue operation, Deho stood in a corridor watching his crew work. They hadn't slept in 3 days. They were eating 1 meal per day so food could stretch further. They were giving their blankets to survivors and shivering in the cold. They were working until they collapsed, then getting up and working more. Captain Velthari found him there. "Commander, we need to discuss reality." "What reality?" Deho asked. "Your ship cannot support this many people for 6 more days. The life support systems will fail. You have limited food and water. You need to make difficult choices." "What choices?" Velthari's voice was sad but firm. "Choose who lives and who dies. Take who you can save. Leave the rest on the Harmony with what supplies you can spare. Maybe another ship will find them." Deho stared at the alien captain. "You're asking me to leave people behind. I'm asking you to accept limitations. You can save thousands. That's more than anyone expected. But you cannot save everyone. Watch me, that's not possible. Then we'll make it possible." Deho turned to face Velthari directly. "I didn't come this far, didn't watch my crew work themselves to death, didn't fight 17 raiders just to give up now. We save everyone, all 40,000, or we die trying." Velthari saw the absolute certainty in the humans' eyes and understood something profound. Humans didn't think about what was possible. They decided what needed to happen, then made it possible through sheer stubbornness. That night, Deho called his senior officers together. They gathered in the cold bridge, exhausted beyond words. "I need you to understand what I'm about to ask. We need to push harder. Less food for us, less sleep, less everything. We give what we have to the survivors." Heejin spoke first, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Already done, sir. I cut my rations yesterday." Jiwon nodded. "Medical supplies are stretched across all species. We're making medications last 3 times longer than they should." Taman said quietly, "I converted my quarters into sleeping space for families. I'll sleep in shifts at the weapons console." Minji added, "I'm running navigation on stimulants and 4 hours of sleep per day." Borum, the youngest, smiled despite her exhaustion. "My mother always said I was too stubborn. Time to prove her right." Deho felt something break inside his chest. Not breaking apart, but breaking open. These people, his crew, his family, were willing to give everything for strangers. "Thank you," he said simply. "All of you." Over the next 4 days, the crew of the Revenant performed what the galaxy would later call the human miracle. They starved themselves to feed others. They froze themselves to warm others. They stayed awake while others slept. They gave everything they had, and when that wasn't enough, they gave more. On day 5, Heejin collapsed in the engine room from hypothermia and exhaustion. Taman found her and carried her to medical, then took over her duties using only her notes as guidance. The Revenant moved like nothing the Raiders had ever seen. Most military vessels in the galaxy flew in straight lines, making predictable movements. They followed established combat patterns that had been refined over thousands of years. The human destroyer followed no such patterns. Minji's hands flew across the navigation controls. The ship twisted, spun, dove, and climbed in 3-dimensional movements that would have torn apart vessels built by other species. Inside the Revenant, Gravity compensators screamed as they tried to keep up with the extreme maneuvers. Even with the compensators, the crew felt the G-forces pressing against their bodies. The raider ships tried to target the destroyer, but it was like trying to catch smoke with their hands. Every time they locked on, the Revenant had already moved to a new position. "First target acquired," Taman announced, his voice perfectly calm despite the chaos around him. Firing. The Revenant's port railgun fired. The weapon was simple in concept. A magnetic accelerator that launched a tungsten slug at a fraction of light speed. No fancy energy beams. No exotic particles. Just a solid piece of metal moving so fast that nothing could stop it. The tungsten slug hit a raider gunship dead center. The ship didn't explode in a dramatic fireball like in movies. It simply stopped existing. The kinetic energy was so extreme that the matter was torn apart at the molecular level. One moment there was a ship. The next moment there was a rapidly expanding cloud of atoms. "Target destroyed," Taman reported. On the command ship of the raider fleet, Karthak Vor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. One of his gunships had just vanished. Not damaged, not disabled. Completely gone. "All ships converge on that destroyer," he roared. "Surround it! Box it in!" 9 frigates moved to encircle the Revenant. They fired their weapons in a coordinated barrage that should have overwhelmed any single ship's defenses. Energy beams and missiles filled the space around the human destroyer. The Revenant's point defense systems came alive. Dozens of small automated guns tracked incoming missiles and destroyed them before they could hit. Energy beams struck the destroyer's shields, which flickered but held. The ship was taking damage, but it was built to take damage. Earth's engineers designed it to survive conditions that would destroy softer vessels. "Shields at 70%, Borum called out. "Continue evasive maneuvers," Deho ordered. "Taman, take out those frigates." The Revenant spun on its axis, bringing the starboard railgun to bear. Taman fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 frigates died, torn apart by tungsten death. The other frigates scattered, their commanders suddenly realizing that surrounding the human ship was a death sentence. Karthak Vor watched 5 of his ships disappear in less than 2 minutes. He had fought in dozens of battles across the void marches. He had killed countless victims. He feared nothing, but watching the human destroyer dance through his fleet like a vengeful god made something cold settle in his chest. "Deploy the net," he ordered. "Lock them down!" 2 cruisers fired a specialized weapon, an electromagnetic net designed to disable ship systems. It spread out in a wide pattern impossible to dodge. The net wrapped around the Revenant, and for a moment the raiders thought they had won. Then Hyejan proved why human engineers were both brilliant and slightly insane. She had been monitoring the battle from engineering, watching power levels, calculating stress points. The moment the net hit, she rerouted all power from non-essential systems and overloaded the shield generators. The shields exploded outward with so much force that they vaporized the net entirely. The blast wave damaged 3 nearby raider ships. "Shields gone," Hyejan reported over the intercom. "But we're still flying. Give me 10 minutes and I can get them back online." "You have 5 minutes, Deho replied. Taman was already adjusting his tactics. Without shields, they were vulnerable. One good hit could cripple them. He needed to end this quickly. He pulled up the tactical map and studied the positions of the remaining ships. 10 raiders left. More than enough to kill them if they got organized. "Minji, I need you to put us on a specific trajectory," Taman said. "Can you line up the remaining gunships?" Minji understood immediately. "Give me 30 seconds. The Revenant dove toward the Eternal Harmony, passing so close to the cruise ship that the 2 vessels almost touched. The raiders trying to follow had to adjust their formation. For just a moment, 2 of the heavy gunships lined up perfectly with each other. Taman fired. The tungsten slug passed through the first gunship and kept going, its momentum barely affected. It struck the second gunship a moment later. Both ships died. "That's 7 down," Taman said. 10 to go. But Karthak Vor had finally figured out a counter-strategy. "All ships target the Eternal Harmony. If we destroy it, the humans have no reason to fight." His weapons officer stared at him in horror. "Commander, there are 40,000 civilians on that ship, and if we don't kill them, we'll all die." Karthak Vor's eyes were wild with fear and rage. "Fire everything at the cruise ship's reactor. Breach containment. End this now!" 3 cruisers turned their weapons toward the Eternal Harmony. Energy built up in their main guns. preparing to fire the shots that would kill 40,000 innocent people. Aboard the cruise ship, Velthari saw the weapons charging. His hands shook. There was nothing he could do. No way to escape. No way to defend his ship. He closed his eyes, waiting for death. Contact in 12 seconds, Borum warned. The Revenant was too far out of position. There was no time to intercept. No way to stop the attack. Every calculation said it was impossible. Taman didn't care about impossible. His hands moved across the weapons console faster than thought. Numbers flooded his mind, trajectories, velocities, energy transfers. He saw the solution in a flash of desperate inspiration. Hyejin, I need everything from the starboard capacitor, everything. That will destroy the railgun, Hyejin protested. Better the gun than 40,000 people. Do it now. Hyejin rerouted power without further argument. Every available watt of electricity flooded into the port railgun. The weapon was never meant to handle this much energy. Warning alarms screamed as metal began to overheat. Taman fired. The tungsten slug left the barrel at speeds that should have been impossible. It moved so fast that it warped space around it, creating a temporary gravity well. The slug passed between the raider ships and the Eternal Harmony, just as the raiders fired their weapons. The gravity well bent the energy beams. Physics itself was twisted by the sheer kinetic force. The beams curved away from the cruise ship, missing by barely 200 meters. The three cruisers, unable to handle the energy feedback from their interrupted shots, exploded from internal overload. On the Revenant's bridge, sparks and smoke poured from the weapons console. The port railgun had melted into useless slag. That weapon is gone, Hyejin reported, but we're still alive. Deho looked at Taman, who sat calmly at his console despite the burns on his hands from overheating controls. Good shooting, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir. 5 raider ships remained. Karthak Vor knew he was beaten. His fleet was destroyed. His confidence was shattered. He activated his communication system, his voice shaking. Human vessel, I surrender. We surrender. Galactic Council law requires you to accept our surrender and take us as prisoners. Deho's face appeared on Vor's screen. The human's expression was absolutely cold, showing no emotion whatsoever. You welded cargo bays shut with children inside, Deho said quietly. You let them suffocate in the dark while you counted your profits. You lost your right to council law when you decided these people weren't worth treating as living beings. But the council isn't here. We are. Deho gestured to Taman. The weapons officer, now using only the starboard railgun and missile systems, eliminated the remaining raider ships one by one. It took less than 3 minutes. When it was done, 17 raider vessels had become debris fields and the space around the Eternal Harmony was quiet. Inside the cruise ship, Velthari opened his eyes. He was alive. His ship was alive. The raiders were gone. A single human destroyer had done what should have been impossible. Captain, Thalris whispered. They actually did it. 1 ship against 17. They won. The communication system activated. Borum's voice, warm despite the exhaustion, filled the bridge of the Eternal Harmony. Captain Velthari, this is the Revenant. The raiders are gone. You're safe now. Prepare for emergency docking. We're coming to get you out of there. Velthari tried to respond, but his voice broke. Tears streamed down his face. Around him, his crew was crying too. Not from fear anymore, but from relief. On the Revenant, Deho stood and looked at his crew. They were exhausted. They were injured. Their ship was damaged. One of their main weapons was destroyed. But they had won. Good work, everyone, he said simply. Now comes the hard part. We need to save 40,000 lives. Minji, take us in. Nice and slow. Let's not damage their ship any more than it already is. The Revenant moved toward the Eternal Harmony, its engines gentle now instead of fierce. The destroyer that had moved like a predator during combat now moved like a caretaker, carefully approaching the wounded crew's ship. Inside both vessels, crews prepared for the next impossible task. They had survived the battle. Now they needed to survive the rescue. The Revenant cut through space at dangerous speeds. In the engine room, Hyejin watched the temperature gauges climb higher and higher. The engines were running at 115% capacity, well beyond their safety limits. Metal groaned under the stress. Warning lights flashed across every console. Come on, baby, Hyejin whispered to the ship. Hold together for me. Just a little longer. On the bridge, Minji kept her eyes locked on the navigation display. At this speed, even a small piece of debris could tear through their hull. Her hands never stopped moving, making tiny adjustments to their course every few seconds. Sweat dripped down her face despite the cold air circulation. 10 hours to target, she announced. Diho nodded. He had not left the bridge since they changed course. He stood at the command station, his eyes moving between different displays. Fuel consumption was higher than expected. They would have barely enough to reach the nearest council station after the rescue. If anything went wrong, if they needed to use more fuel, they would be stranded. "Sir, we're receiving multiple transmissions," Borum said. "The Galactic Council is ordering us to stop. They say we don't have authorization for military operations in the void marches. Ignore them. Admiral Kretar is personally demanding that we return to our assigned route. Tell the Admiral we're experiencing communication difficulties," Deho said without emotion. "We can't hear his orders clearly." Borum smiled despite the tension. "Yes, sir. Very poor reception in this region of space." Taman was busy at the weapons console, running diagnostics on every system. The railguns were ready. The missiles were loaded. Point defense systems were active. Everything was prepared for combat. He knew they would need it. The sensors showed 17 raider ships surrounding the Eternal Harmony. "Commander," Taman said quietly, "the tactical situation is bad, very bad. 17 hostile vessels against 1 destroyer. In any normal engagement, we should retreat and call for reinforcements." "These aren't normal circumstances," Diho replied. "No, sir, they're not." Taman pulled up the enemy ship configurations on his screen. "But I need you to understand what we're facing. 9 light frigates, 5 medium cruisers, 3 heavy gunships. If they coordinate their attack, they can destroy us in minutes. Then we don't let them coordinate. We hit them fast and hard before they can organize a response. That's not a strategy, sir. That's suicide." Deho finally looked at his weapons officer. Taman was right, of course. By every rule of military engagement, they should turn back. They should wait for proper support. They should follow protocol. But protocol meant that 40,000 people would die while committees debated the proper response. "Taman, when you joined the Terran Space Service, what did you swear to do?" "To protect humanity's interests and defend those who cannot defend themselves. Those people on the Eternal Harmony cannot defend themselves. Yes, they're not human, but they're people. And they need defending." Taman was quiet for a moment. Then he returned to his console. "I'll have firing solutions ready when we arrive, sir." In the medical bay, Jiwon was trying to perform an impossible calculation. How do you prepare to treat 40,000 patients from 17 different species with supplies meant for 140 humans? The answer was that you couldn't. But that wouldn't stop him from trying. He pulled up every alien medical file he could access, studying anatomies he had never seen before. Some species had 3 hearts, others had no heart at all, using a completely different circulatory system. Some breathed oxygen. Others would die if exposed to oxygen. The complexity made his head hurt. "Doctor, you should get some rest," said one of his medical assistants. "Can't rest," Jiwon muttered. "Need to learn. Need to be ready. You can't learn 17 species worth of medicine in 10 hours. Then I'll learn as much as I can and improvise the rest." Across the galaxy, news of the human response spread like wildfire. On hundreds of worlds, billions of beings watched the developing situation. Would the humans actually attack 17 raider ships to save a cruise liner full of aliens? It seemed insane. It seemed impossible. On one particular world in a small apartment, a young silicant watched the news with her father. The silicants were crystalline beings, peaceful and logical. They did not understand violence. They did not understand the concept of sacrifice for strangers. "Father, why are the humans doing this?" the young silicant asked. "The passengers on that ship are not human. They are not the humans' responsibility." Her father was quiet for a long time. "I do not know, child. Perhaps we will understand when we see what happens next." Aboard the dying Eternal Harmony, conditions had become critical. The temperature was now well below freezing. People huddled together for warmth. Species that normally would never interact pressed against each other in desperate attempts to stay alive. In the sealed cargo bays, the screaming had stopped. Either people had lost the strength to scream, or they had already died. Captain Velthari moved through the ship like a ghost. He tried to maintain hope, tried to keep people calm, but it was becoming harder with each passing hour. Children were dying. The elderly were dying. The sick were dying. And he was powerless to stop it. Captain, his communications officer, Thalris, called out, "The human ship will be here in 4 hours." But there's something else. The raiders know they're coming. Velthari felt his heart sink. What are the raiders doing? They're preparing for combat. All 17 ships are powering weapons and forming a defensive formation. They're going to use our ship as a shield. Of course they were. The raiders knew that a rescue ship wouldn't fire if it meant hitting the very people they came to save. It was a perfect strategy. The human destroyer would have to either retreat or find some other way around. But Velthari was beginning to understand something about humans. They did not think like other species. They did not follow the same logic. A human ship that came to rescue strangers at suicidal odds was not going to be stopped by a simple tactical problem. "Tell me about human combat doctrine," Velthari said to Thalris. "What do we know about how they fight?" Thalris accessed the military database. "Very little, Captain. Humans have only been in space for 73 years. Most species consider their combat methods crude and overly aggressive. They favor kinetic weapons over energy weapons. They pilot their ships at G-forces that would kill most other species. They take risks that any sane commander would avoid. In other words, they're dangerous. Extremely dangerous, sir, to their enemies and to themselves." Velthari looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a human warship was racing toward them at impossible speeds, preparing to face impossible odds, attempting an impossible rescue. The smart thing would be to be afraid. The logical thing would be to worry that the humans might make the situation worse. But Velthari was too tired and too desperate for logic. He would take dangerous help over no help at all. On the Revenant, Deho called his senior officers to the bridge for a final briefing. Minji, Taman, Hejin, Jiwan, and Borum stood in a semicircle around the command station. They all looked exhausted. None of them had slept since receiving the distress call. "In 3 hours we engage," Deho said simply. "I won't lie to you. The odds are bad. We might not survive. But those 40,000 people definitely won't survive if we don't try. I need to know that you're with me. All of you. Because once we start, there's no turning back." Hejin spoke first. "My engines are ready, Commander." "They'll hold." Taman nodded. "My weapons are ready. We'll make every shot count." Jiwan's voice was steady. "My medical bay is ready. I'll save everyone I can." Borum smiled nervously. "My communication systems are ready, and I've already prepared a very detailed report about our malfunctioning receivers that couldn't hear the Admiral's orders." Minji was last. She looked at Deho with absolute certainty in her eyes. "My navigation is ready, sir. I'll get us through. I'll get us all through." Deho felt something warm in his chest. Pride maybe, or hope. "Then let's go save some lives." The Revenant dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the combat zone. Immediately, 17 raider ships lit up their sensors. Weapon systems powered up. The trap was set, but the raiders had made one critical mistake. They assumed the humans would think like everyone else. They assumed the humans would see the odds and retreat. They assumed wrong. "All hands, battle stations," Deho ordered. "Taman, weapons free." "Minji, take us in. Show them what a Deathworlder can do." The Revenant's engines flared bright, and the destroyer plunged toward the raiders like a predator diving on prey. The luxury cruise ship drifted silently through the darkness of space. Inside, Captain Velthari pressed his shaking hand against the emergency transmitter. The lights flickered around him, each flicker bringing them closer to complete darkness. His crew was dead or dying. The passengers were trapped in sealed cargo bays, their air running out with every passing minute. "This is the eternal harmony." Velthari spoke into the transmitter, his voice breaking. "We are under attack by raiders. Life support is failing. 40,000 souls aboard. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need immediate help. Our children are dying, please." The message burst outward into space, traveling at light speed toward any ship that might be listening. 17 vessels received the call. 16 of them changed their course to move away from the eternal harmony. They had cargo to deliver, schedules to keep, and no desire to risk their lives in the void marches. This was the lawless part of space where the Galactic Council had no power and offered no protection. But one ship turned toward the dying cruise liner. Far across the star system, on the bridge of a human vessel, Commander Deho listened to the distress call for the third time. His dark eyes studied the star map in front of him, calculating distances and fuel consumption. Around him, his crew waited in silence. Sir, the Eternal Harmony is in the Void Marches, said Minji from the navigation console. Her fingers moved across the holographic display. The Council issued warnings to all ships about that region. No rescue guarantees, no insurance coverage. They're on their own. Deho nodded slowly. He had read those warnings. The Galactic Council made it clear that any ship traveling through the Void Marches did so at their own risk. If something went wrong, no help would come. It was not the Council's problem. What's our current mission status? Deho asked. We're transporting medical supplies to the mining colonies on Outpost 7, answered Hyejin from engineering. We're 2 days ahead of schedule, but if we divert to the Eternal Harmony, we'll be a week late. Taemin looked up from the weapons console. His face showed no emotion, but his voice was tight. Sir, the Revenant is not a rescue ship. We don't have the medical facilities or the space to handle 40,000 refugees. We're a destroyer. We're built for combat, not rescue operations. Deho stood up from his command chair and walked to the viewport. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, 40,000 people were dying while waiting for help that the galaxy had decided was not worth sending. Borum, Deho said quietly. Play the message again. The young communications officer hesitated, then activated the recording. Velthari's desperate voice filled the bridge once more. When the captain mentioned children dying, Borum closed her eyes. She was only 23 years old, the youngest member of the crew. She had joined the Terran Space Service because she wanted to explore the galaxy, not to face impossible decisions like this. Commander, Minji said carefully, if we go, we might not be able to save them all. We might not even save most of them. I know, Deho replied. The Council will not support us. They might even punish us for interfering in the Void Marches. I know. We could lose the ship. We could lose crew members. I know, Minji. Deho turned to face his bridge crew. I know all of that. But I also know that I've listened to that message 3 times now. And each time I hear it, I see myself at 8 years old, trapped in the dark after the Ganymede Station disaster. I waited 17 hours for rescue. 17 hours listening to people die around me. And when help finally came, they told my mother it had taken so long because it wasn't economically feasible to respond faster. The bridge was completely silent. Everyone knew about Ganymede. Everyone in the Terran Space Service knew what had happened there. It was the reason many of them had joined in the first place. Deho walked back to his command chair and sat down. Set course for the Eternal Harmony. Maximum burn. Push the engines as hard as they can go. Yes, sir, Minji said, her voice stronger now. Her fingers danced across the navigation controls, plotting the fastest possible course. As the Revenant's engines roared to life, pushing the destroyer to speeds that made the hull groan. News of the human response spread through galactic communication networks. On Council Station Prime, administrators watched with growing concern. The humans are responding, said Admiral Kretar, staring at the tactical display. But they're not sending a hospital ship or a transport vessel. They're sending a Reaper-class destroyer. Counselor Breshtik tilted her head in confusion. Perhaps they don't understand the situation. Should we inform them that rescue operations require specialized vessels? They understand perfectly well, the Admiral replied. The humans always understand. That's what makes them dangerous. On the bridge of the Revenant, Jiwan stood in the doorway looking pale. The medical officer had just finished reviewing their supply inventory. Deho, I need to be completely honest with you. I have medical supplies for maybe 300 critical patients. We have space for about 500 people in the cargo bays. If we push it, 40,000 is impossible. Then we make the impossible possible, Deho said calmly. Start preparing whatever you can. We'll figure out the rest when we get there. And if we can't, failure is not an option today, Doctor. 12 hours into their journey, Borum managed to establish a weak communication link with the Eternal Harmony. The screen flickered, showing Captain Velthari's exhausted face. The alien captain looked worse than before. His skin had turned a sickly color and his eyes were losing focus. Human vessel, Velthari said slowly. I must inform you that we have no way to pay for rescue services. Our accounts are frozen. Our insurance is invalid in this region. If you are coming for profit, I cannot offer any. Deho leaned forward. Captain Velthari, we're not coming for payment. We're coming because you asked for help. Hold your people together. Keep them calm. We'll be there in 14 hours. But you're a warship, Velthari said, confusion clear in his voice. How can you possibly evacuate 40,000 people? We'll figure it out when we arrive. Just stay alive, Captain. Revenant out. The communication ended. Velthari sat alone on his dark bridge, staring at the spot where the human commander's face had been. Around him, his ship was dying by degrees. The temperature had dropped to freezing. The oxygen levels were falling. He could hear screaming from the sealed cargo bays where thousands were trapped. But for the first time since the attack began, Velthari felt something he had not expected to feel again. Hope. The humans were coming. They might be coming in a warship instead of a rescue vessel. They might not have the resources to save everyone, but they were coming. They had not abandoned his people like everyone else had. In the distance, if anyone had been watching from the Eternal Harmony's dying sensors, they would have seen a single point of light growing brighter. The Revenant's engines burned like a small star, pushing the destroyer faster than it was meant to go. Inside that ship, 140 humans prepared themselves for the impossible task ahead. They knew the odds. They knew the risks. They knew they might fail. But they also knew something that the rest of the galaxy was still learning about humanity. When someone calls for help, humans answer, not because it's profitable, not because it's safe, not because it's convenient. They answer because someone needs help, and that is reason enough. The Revenant raced through the darkness toward 40,000 dying souls, and aboard that warship, a crew prepared to perform miracles.